Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so excited to have you here because today we are going to completely strip away centuries of romanticism, Victorian opera house myths, and those classic comic book stereotypes. Forget the towering, mud-spattered barbarian driven by mindless bloodlust. What we're actually going to look at today is the surprisingly structured, highly engineered, and honestly profoundly fascinating reality of the early medieval Norse people. I promise you, the truth is way more captivating than the fiction.
All right, Section 1, Shattering the Viking Myth, Rethinking the Northmen.
You know that pop culture image we all have of the Norse? The horned helmets and the single, unified ethnic identity? It's a complete fantasy. In historical reality, not a single horned helmet has ever been recovered from an active Viking-Age archaeological site. I mean, think about it practically for a second. In battle, a sword blow would easily catch on a horn and literally twist the wearer's neck. These people were highly pragmatic. The vast majority of them weren't professional raiders at all. They were farmers, weavers, smiths, and traders who were driven by deep regional loyalties. And that brings us to a massive paradigm shift. The word Viking wasn't actually who they were. Viking, in Old Norse, was a verb. It was a job description or an activity. You didn't be a Viking, you went on a Viking, meaning a raiding or trading expedition. In reality, they actually called themselves the Nordmenn, the Northmen. Moving right along to Section 2, Life inside the Longhouse, Survival and Smoke. Real life didn't begin on the deck of a legendary ship. It began in the longhouses, or longhouse. Picture this, a windowless structure, maybe up to 100 feet long. Right at the center is the hearth, the eldest galley. Now, because there were no chimneys, just a simple smoke hole in the roof, the air in there was perpetually thick and acrid. In fact, modern skeletons show these people suffered heavily from sinus infections and severe respiratory stress. And right on that smoky hearth sat the daily meal. They relied heavily on grains and a slow simmered scaly stew. Basically, whatever they had, cabbage, turnips, fish, meat, went straight into the pot, usually served alongside skyr, which is this thick yogurt-like dairy staple. Now, here is where it gets kind of funny, because they shared these longhouses with their livestock during the freezing winters, to use their body heat. They definitely suffered from intestinal parasites. But deeply annoyed Anglo-Saxon chroniclers actually wrote that despite the dirt floors and the parasites, the Norse were remarkably clean compared to their European neighbors. They bathed every single Saturday, which they literally called laugardag, or washing day. Excavations show they were completely obsessed with grooming. They were constantly using ear scoops, tweezers, and highly decorated antler combs to maintain neatly trimmed beards and shaved back hairstyles. Section 3, the social ladder. Laws, keys, and the thing. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how strictly stratified this era was. Down at the bottom, you have the thralls. Slavery was the absolute grueling economic engine of this era. Thralls were considered property, though occasionally they could buy their freedom. In the middle, we have the carls. These were the free backbone of society, the farmers and smiths who could own land and speak up at local assemblies. And right at the top are the jarls. These were the wealthy elites and chieftains. But a jarl's power was incredibly precarious. If a jarl was stingy with his silver, or if he lost in battle, his followers would instantly pack up and abandon him for a better leader. Within that middle class of the free carls, we find something truly remarkable for medieval Europe. The husfreyja, or Norse wife, wore heavy iron keys hanging from her brooches. This wasn't just some pretty jewelry, it was a powerful symbol of absolute authority over the estate. If her husband was away trading or raiding, she was entirely in charge of the food, the silver, and the defense of the farm. She held incredibly strong legal rights, too. She could own land in her own right, initiate a divorce if her husband failed to provide, and she could even reclaim her dowry. And speaking of legal rights, despite their incredibly violent reputation, the Norse were deeply litigious. They settled their disputes at regional assemblies called the Thing. They didn't have prisons. Instead, juries of free men would issue fines, or, far worse, the punishment of skogungar, outlawry. If you were declared an outlaw, you lost every single civil right. Anyone was legally permitted to kill you. You were banished to the wilderness, basically turning this punishment into a terrifying, slow, death sentence. All right, Section 4, Mastering the Sea, the Engineering of Expansion. Just 3 to 4 feet, and this brilliantly illustrates the lethal genius of Norse engineering. A massive warship carrying 80 armed men drew only 3 to 4 feet of water.
This was paired with what's called a clinker construction method, where overlapping planks were fastened with iron rivets. This allowed the ship to literally flex and ride over massive ocean waves rather than rigidly fighting them. But because of this incredibly shallow draft, they didn't just cross oceans. They could navigate incredibly shallow inland rivers like the Seine and the Rhine and rode directly onto sandy beaches without ever needing a deep water harbor.
So why even get on these boats in the first place? The motivation to go on a Viking was a really complex mix of socio-economic pressures. Scandinavia had very rocky, scarce farmland, and thanks to primogeniture, younger sons inherited absolutely nothing. They needed wealth, specifically foreign coins and jewelry they could weigh on pocket scales as hack silver, just to buy land and pay dowries. Add in a strong desire to escape centralizing kings, and you had motivated men and women willing to endure freezing ocean spray on open, toiletless wooden decks, rowing for hours on end just to seek a better future.
When they did raid, they utilized utterly terrifying hit-and-run tactics. Because of those ships we just talked about, they could make a rapid approach, beach right on the sand, execute a sudden shock charge, sack portable wealth from completely undefended places like monasteries, and withdraw before local armies could even assemble. And they did all of this wielding highly specialized weapons, mail-piercing, two-handed Dane axes, overlapping round shields to form a disciplined shield wall, and incredibly expensive pattern-welded swords that were passed down as literal heirlooms with terrifying names like Footbiter and Leg Gilder.
Section 5. Faith, Fate, and Gods. The Loom of the Norns.
So, the crucial point to understanding their mindset is ord, or weird, absolute destiny. The Norse believed the universe was held together by a colossal ash tree called Yggdrasil. At its base sat the Norns, three female entities who literally spun and cut the thread of your destiny. Your exact death date was decided the moment you were born, and nothing could change it. But rather than causing despair, this fatalism actually fueled their immense courage. If your death is already preordained, why run? Dying bravely in battle was seen as the only way to ensure your name would be remembered in story and song forever.
But here's the thing, their faith wasn't dogmatic, it was extremely pragmatic. As the Viking Age progressed and they encountered Christianity, this fascinating syncretism developed. They didn't just suddenly convert, they adapted. They might pray to Thor, the champion of the common farmer, for spring rains or for survival in a violent sea storm, but they would simultaneously invoke the White Christ for city trade and treaties. They'd often get a preliminary baptism just so Christian merchants would agree to do business with them. Archaeologists have even found stone molds used by merchants to cast both pagan Thor's hammers and Christian crosses at the exact same time. Talk about covering your bases, right?
Finally, Section 6, What the Earth Remembers, the Lens of Modern Science. Now you might be wondering, this raises a massive question. If they didn't write their own extensive histories, and the famous medieval sagas were written centuries after the fact, often filled with total hyperbole, how do we actually know any of this? Well, modern science acts as our most reliable lens into their actual day-to-day lives. The truth is literally etched into the earth and into their bones. Through paleodemography, we can look at their skeletons and see severe joint wear from a lifetime of heavy manual labor and stunted height from childhood malnutrition. Through ancient DNA analysis, we know there was no single Viking race. Their extensive trade networks brought incredible genetic diversity straight into Scandinavia, from the British Isles, Southern Europe, and Central Asia. And through dendrochronology, which is the study of tree rings, we can date the exact year their magnificent clinker ships were built. Science has meticulously reconstructed a society that was living on the absolute knife edge of survival.
And that leaves us with this final provocative thought to ponder. These were people enduring heavy smoke, freezing winds, and relentless backbreaking labor, yet they built complex laws, crafted magnificent ships, and possessed an extraordinary spirit of exploration. They conquered not just through force, but through fierce pragmatism and an unwavering belief that life is short, but glory endures. So when your fate is already sealed, what kind of legacy will you fight to leave behind?
Please like and subscribe.